Comply. There I am. Good morning and welcome. My name is David Brenner, and I serve on your fellowship board of directors. I want to thank you all for being here today and extend a special welcome to any visitors. If you would like more information about the fellowship, please sign our virtual guest book online on the fellowship website. Whether joining us from home or here in the fellowship hall, we invite you to stay after the service for coffee fellowship, where you can introduce yourself and join in conversation with kindred spirits. And we have announcements today. It's a big Sunday coming up on Sunday, September 11th, because RE starts up, and it's a huge change in a lot of people's lives. Maybe not all of us, but for those people that are in it, I've done this before. Kids all start in the service with their families. Riley reads them a book for Time for All Ages and then guides them to the parking lot with an activity there. There'll be tables, there'll be munchies, and then split up into classrooms. But we're still looking for some volunteer substitute teachers and for individuals to lead one-time large group RE activities on the last Sunday of each month, such as nature hikes or group projects. The nursery will be reopening, and this is a big deal for the people of that age. The nursery will be reopening very soon. If you anticipate using childcare, please let us know so that we can get an idea of numbers. And Sam is the real expert in this. I'm just the reader. So, on behalf of this caring and nurturing congregation, I welcome each and every one of you to this sacred space. Here, we invite you to an experience of transformation, hope, renewal, and connections, which may inspire you to understand life in new ways. Thank you for joining us today.
Our opening words are by Reverend Aaron McImries. Being told that one has inherent worth and dignity is a meaningless and hollow statement unless that person has the ability to live their day-to-day lives accordingly. People know that they are worthy of respect when they are treated with respect. People know that they matter when they're treated like they matter. When people have no voice on the job and have to struggle from month to month just to survive, much less face inevitable emergencies like serious illness, injury, or other event, their very humanness can feel reduced to the state of non-person or serfdom. Without the ability to speak up and act up, to advocate for themselves and their coworkers, not only is the inherent dignity of workers denied, but even the expression or assertion of that dignity can result in discipline, demotion, or termination. We light this chalice to honor the worth and dignity of workers everywhere. Our opening song, Bread and Roses, comes from a UU songbook, How Can We Keep From Singing, published in 1976. The songbook is full of social justice songs and has a whole section of labor and union songs. The phrase bread and roses originated from a speech given by American women's suffrage activist Helen Todd. In a line in that speech about bread for all and roses too. The phrase became a slogan commonly associated with the textile strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts between January and March 1912, now often referred to as the Bread and Roses Strike. In the history article, The Strike That Shook America, Christopher Klein writes, "The power looms that thundered inside the rooms of the Everett Mill in Lawrence, Massachusetts, suddenly fell silent on January 11, 1912. When a mill official demanded to know why workers were standing motionless next to their machines, the explanation was simple: not enough pay. The workers who had opened their pay envelopes that afternoon discovered their weekly wages had been reduced by 32 cents. A newly enacted Massachusetts law had reduced the work week for women and children from 56 to 54 hours. But mill owners, unlike in the past, cut the workers' wages proportionally. For workers who only averaged $8.76 per week, every penny was precious, and 32 cents made the difference between eating a meal or going hungry. The strike continued amid worker protests, skirmishes, hired thugs, and even deaths resulted. It finally ended after 9 weeks. President Taft intervened, and the brutal and unsafe conditions of the factories were described in congressional testimonies from striking workers and children's testimony. The two sides agreed to 15% wage hike, a bump in overtime compensation, and a promise not to retaliate against the striking workers. The slogan, "Pairing Bread and Roses," appeals for both fair wages and dignified conditions, and it found resonance as transcending tedious struggles for marginal economic advances, with workers wanting fair wages to cover basic necessities like housing and adequate food for their families, as well as time to pursue non-work pursuits that offer dignity and respect, like art, music, and education. Abel. Our Time for All Ages is a read-aloud book, Labor Day, by Carmen Bredesen.
Labor Day. Pack the picnic basket and strike up the band. It's Labor Day. Labor Day is a holiday in the United States. People celebrate it on the first Monday in September. Labor Day marks the end of the summer. Labor is another word for work. We honor American workers on Labor Day. People get a day off from their jobs. Many towns have picnics and parades. Different kinds of workers march in Labor Day parades. Some are firefighters, teachers, and factory workers. Factories are places full of big machines. These machines make things such as toys, computers, and cars. The first factories made tractors, wagons, and cloth. Long ago, many factories were dirty and dangerous. The air was full of smoke and dust. Workers often got hurt using the big machines. People spent 12 hours a day at their jobs. Poor children worked too. They did not go to school. Some people complained about their jobs, but factory owners did not always listen. The workers wanted to make things better. They started groups called labor unions. A group has more power than just one person. Factory owners paid attention to the unions. If an owner did not listen, the union called a strike. Nobody in the union went to work during a strike. The factory shut down and the owner lost money. Workers did not come back until the owners made the factories better. The owners cleaned up the buildings. They made the workdays shorter. The government also passed laws. Factories had to be safe for the workers. It became a crime for children to work there. Today, unions are not just for factory workers. There are unions for teachers, builders, actors, and others. Labor Day helps us remember how things have changed. Let's give a big cheer for American workers.
Good morning. Ours is a welcoming community where we find connection, a spiritual community where we find meaning, a sharing community where our joys are amplified, and a caring community where our sorrows are lessened. It is a tradition in our community to take this moment to share our joys and sorrows and acknowledge the mutual support of this community. It is a time of sharing, not a time for announcements. If you would like, you may come forward to the microphone, state your name, share a joy or sorrow, and I will light a milestone candle for you. We will do the fellowship hall first, and then we'll transition to our friends on Zoom.
I'm Roger and
Kay Berger.
And we celebrated. We didn't really celebrate, but we observed. We were we were in quarantine at the time, but we observed our 50 years of living and loving in Ames. August was the month we moved from West Virginia to Ames, and in the previous 14 years of our marriage, we'd probably had at least 10 and maybe 20 different mailing addresses in different towns and states. But for whatever reason, once we got to Ames, we stuck. And we're very happy to be starting our 51st year in this wonderful town. And by the way, one of the first organizations we joined, of course, when we came to Ames was the Unitarian Fellowship.
It was just a little silo when we first came, and 35 of us at the fellowship, but it was a wonderful group, and we've stayed with it.
I actually have a joy. I'm Robin Sin, a fairly new member, and yesterday was my husband's and mine 33rd wedding anniversary. Anyone else in the hall? All right, let's have a moment of silence while we transition to our remoter families and friends. All righty. Our last candle is lit for those milestones that have been left unsaid, that we hold gently in our hearts. May we remember those who have spoken, those they have named, and those we hold in silence in our hearts. Let us share a moment of silence together. It is good to be together. Next, rise as you are comfortable and able for a song, How Could Anyone? Mary will play it through once for us, and then we will sing it through twice.
This reading is from There is Power in Union by Aaron McEmrys, a UU Guide to Worker Justice. Although a Unitarian Universalist basis for supporting justice for working people may seem self-evident, it is nonetheless important to be clear about the moral and theological foundation of our justice making. Unitarians and Universalists have been actively supporting justice for working people since the birth of our movement in America. As early as 1838, William Ellery Channing, one of our chief architects of Unitarianism, added his substantial support to the working men's associations that were the forebearers to our present-day labor unions. Channing believed that working people were the children of God and had the same tremendous potential as any human being, and that they could not truly manifest that potential until the gross economic and social exploitation of the day were overcome. Not long after Channing, Theodore Parker began speaking about economic exploitation and was keenly supportive of the work and vision of Brook Farm, a utopian community founded by Unitarian ministers. And following in this vein, the great Unitarian minister John Haynes Holmes argued that the individual salvation was impossible without social salvation, the liberation of all people from whatever shackles them. He described poverty thus: poverty in this age, as in every age, in our country, as in every country, is primarily due to the fact of social injustice, that employment cannot be had by those who are ready to work, that employment, even when regular, is not paid enough to enable the faithful and efficient workman to guard against illness, to protect his widow from dependence, or to provide for his own old age. That insufficient wages force thousands of families to crowd into unhealthy tenements, to eat insufficient food, and to wear insufficient clothing, thus paving the way for physical weaknesses and disability. That accidents rob the wage earners without compensation from society. That taxes are inequitable, throwing the chief burden upon the poor instead of upon the rich. That natural resources, which are the basis of all wealth, are in the hands of a few instead of under the control of society at large, and are thus exploited for the benefit of the few and not for the sake of the common welfare. And the distribution of wealth is grossly unfair and disproportionate. In the final analysis, that society is organized upon a basis of injustice, not justice, and is permeated by the spirit of selfishness and not of love. Holmes wrote these words at the beginning of the 20th century, and although almost 100 years have passed since then, not much has changed. But Unitarian Universalists remain faithful to the vision of our tradition as passed down to us by all those who have gone before.
Our offering, our offering recipient for September is RIP medical debt. Today, 1 in 4 Americans choose between paying medical bills and covering their basic needs. RIP is a national nonprofit whose purpose is to strengthen communities by abolishing financially burdensome medical debt. Every $100 donation relieves $10,000 in medical debt. RIP uses data analytics to pinpoint the debt of those most in need, households that earn less than 4 times the poverty level, or whose debts are 5% or more of annual income. RIP buys debt in bundles, millions of dollars at a time, at a fraction of the original cost. As an organization, UUFA, the UUFA donation will relieve medical debt to individuals and families across the country. If we raise a minimum of $5,000, we can begin a campaign to maximize our impact to a specific state or region. We're going to watch a short video about this, but I wanted to first introduce the music that will come after that video. Because following the video, Mary Richards will provide special music with the song De Colores. This song began as a traditional folk song in the Spanish-speaking world and was adopted as an anthem of a Catholic revivalist movement in the 1940s. It is best known to be associated with the United Farm Worker movement in the 1960s. The song brought joy and hope to members of the movement. People joined hands as they sang it at union meetings, at protests, and other gatherings, and it enhanced a sense of community, a sense of belonging, and a sense of power. A UFW member, Kathy Murkia, said, "While the lyrics don't speak of social justice, it is a song of the season of springtime and beauty, of life and colors. And we were all kinds of different colors. I believe as we sang, our hearts were longing for the beauty that comes with gentle love and justice." As Mary plays this song, let's remember Cesar Chavez, a leader in organizing the farm workers, along with Dolores Huerta, a single mother with 7 children, and the work they did in securing labor rights for agricultural workers. But first, we'll watch that video about RIP.
Over 100 million Americans, or 1 in 3, have struggled with the weight of medical debt, causing many to deplete their savings, turn to crowdfunding, declare bankruptcy, or worse, delay the medical care they need to stay alive. More than half of Americans say getting a bill they can't afford is as scary as a serious diagnosis itself. Our debt is killing us. But what if we could make that debt disappear? We're RIP Medical Debt, a nonprofit that has done just that, eliminating billions of dollars in debt for struggling Americans. We are working not only to shift the way we think about medical debt, but change the lives of people living in its shadow. So how do we abolish billions of dollars in debt without billions of dollars? By using the rules of the game, not to win, but to create a world where we take care of those who need it most. When you go to a doctor's office, hospital, or clinic, you might get a separate bill for every step of your care. If these bills aren't paid, they can be sold to a debt buyer for a fraction of what you owe. However, they will still attempt to collect the full amount owed from you. Some will add negative marks to your credit report, affecting your ability to buy a car or home, while others will even take legal action, resulting in wage garnishments and property liens. These actions used to leverage payment threaten the financial health of hardworking Americans who have this debt through no fault of their own. That's where we come in. RIP Medical Debt works with our partners to see through the chaos and find those debts that will be the most impactful when relieved. While we can't search for a particular individual's debt, we can filter them down to make sure we're serving the people who are least able to pay. With our donor support, we're able to buy millions of dollars of debt at drastically reduced pricing, which makes this disappearing act one of monumental proportions. But we don't stop there. We make sure any negative marks on credit scores for the debt we buy are removed. So not only can recipients forget their past, but they can begin to move forward. Our programs put no additional tax burden on the recipients and are compliant with HIPAA and the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And after all the behind-the-scenes work is done, every year we send out thousands of letters to homes all across the country, letting people know their past is in the past, their health is not a burden, and their life is worth more than a bill. And together, we'll cure medical debt.
Thank you, Mary. Some of the images in the last few slides depict the farm worker movement in the early days. Dolores Huerta receiving the Medal of Freedom in 2012, and also images of housing conditions of farm workers in the present day. There is still a way to go. Well, it's Labor Day weekend. It seems this weekend is significant in marking the end of summer. And for Labor Day sales, yay! A 3-day weekend giving us our last hurrah before we head into fall. For family outdoor meals and activities, a last weekend on the water. And yes, for some, putting away your white summer clothes and those white shoes. But wait, I think it is important that we as UUs honor the true meaning of Labor Day. I looked up some history of Labor Day, and I can tell you, reading about the labor movement moved me. I realized that the union movement is part of my story and a big part of who I am, my roots. For I am the daughter of a union family. I grew up in a blue-collar, working-class town in northern Minnesota. My hometown, Virginia, Minnesota, was in the heart of the Iron Range of Minnesota. The Iron Range northwest of Duluth is where some of the richest iron ore deposits in the world existed. There are 3 old mountain ranges, the Mesabi, the Vermilion, and the Cuyuna, within the wilderness and forests of northern Minnesota. The area was populated with settlements of immigrants who came to the U.S. to find jobs mining iron ore and to make a better life for their families. Both my grandfathers emigrated from Sweden to find work on the Iron Range in Minnesota. One came at the age of 17 and became a fireman in the mines of Sparta, Minnesota. He later became a hardware store merchant, undertaker, and business entrepreneur when the mining company moved the whole town from Sparta to a place now called Gilbert, Minnesota. And my other grandfather worked in the mines of Pengilly, Minnesota, and raised 4 children as a widower while working as a miner. The area attracted immigrants from at least 43 countries in the late 1880s and the early 1900s. As mining companies did not fairly compensate workers, labor unions helped to unify people where cultural differences and language differences could create divisions. It helped that many of the immigrants came from socialist countries. Education was seen as a unifier for the settlers, and the communities of the Iron Range levied property taxes on the mines that funded palatial schools in towns across the area that were equal to none. My own high school in a town of 14,000 people was built in the 1930s and had 2 Olympic swimming pools, 2 huge gymnasiums, a magnificent auditorium, state-of-the-art laboratory, science laboratories, home economics laboratories, orchestra and band programs, foreign language programs, fully outfitted vocational programs and libraries, as well as vibrant adult education programs. And those schools were typical across the region. Most of my friends' parents were blue collar and worked in the mines or for the mine companies. And the union was central to creating safe working conditions, fair wages, and reasonable working hours. My own father worked in a manufacturing plant as a maintenance mechanic. The plant was the Arrow Shirt Factory, employing many women in 3 of the range communities. And my father was an officer in the Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America. He was politically active as well, and it's not just the Democratic Party in Minnesota. The DFL is the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. A poignant childhood memory for me is traveling along with my father as he attended union meetings and conventions in various places. I remember one summer our family traveled as a family vacation to a convention in Illinois along the Illinois River, where we met amalgamated clothing workers from across the nation. This was my first experience spending time with a significant number of Black people, mostly women. These women were powerful organizers, upbeat, compassionate, and kind. Mom and us kids camped nearby. My siblings and I were invited to the evening sing-along sessions. Many union songs had words written to familiar tunes and were easy to learn. And we sang and sang. After the convention, my family that week went on to travel and camp further through the South, and the 7 of us sitting in our Plymouth push-button transmission station wagon were belting out those union songs. My oldest brother and I were reminiscing on a call over FaceTime in the last month, and we both burst out singing together as if it was in our bones. There once was a union maid who never was afraid of goons and ginks and company finks and deputy sheriffs that made the raid. They went to the union hall where a meeting it was called. They showed their card to the National Guard, and this is what they'd say: "Oh, you can't scare me. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. Oh, you can't scare me. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union till the day I die." Yep, that music's in my blood. Thank you, Mary. And here we are today, the same story. Immigrants trying to find decent paying jobs, people of all races trying to make a living, needing bread and roses too. People working several low-pay, part-time jobs to pay the rent and put food on the table. How do they find time for the roses, for the time with their children, our children? There is a widening income disparity between the wealthy and the poor. Affordable, decent housing is hard to find. With the pandemic, we saw essential workers in our own state and across the Midwest reporting to work in meatpacking plants as other work environments were shut down. In October of 2021, Debbie Berkowitz, a worker safety and health expert and former senior policy advisor for OSHA, shared shocking statistics with the U.S. House Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Crisis about the effect of the coronavirus pandemic on workers in meatpacking plants. More workers have died from COVID-19 in the last 18 months, she writes, in the meat and poultry industry than died from all work-related causes in the industry in the past 15 years. She testified that more than 59,000 workers at the nation's top meat processing companies were infected with the coronavirus during the first year of the pandemic. 59,000, and at least 269 workers died Those numbers are 3 times higher than had been previously reported. Instead of reacting swiftly to address the apparent threat to health and safety of their workers, many meatpacking plant companies, such as Smithfield and Tyson, prioritized profits and productions, failing to ensure that meatpacking facilities had sufficient coronavirus precautions until infection rates rose so high as to require facility closures or attract public scrutiny. And you maybe recall some of the plants that closed up in the Waterloo area. As many other businesses restructured and reorganized to comply with the CDC guidance, many meatpacking companies continue to ask their employees to work on crowded assembly lines without screening, personal protective equipment, or time for proper hygiene. For example, despite purporting to adopt a relaxed attendance policy and give paid leave for employees who tested positive, an internal Tyson talking points obtained by the subcommittee show that Tyson had implemented virtually no coronavirus screening precautions, only having plans to implement temperature checks before shifts in the future, while nonetheless telling its workers it's vital that you come to work as planned, despite stories about sheltering in place. Workers felt that they would lose their jobs if they didn't go to work, and they came in sick. The report states that a study of infected Iowa workers in the early days found that about 64% of them were either Hispanic or Black, 18% were non-white, 16% were Asian, and 2% were members of other unspecified groups. These trends in Nebraska and Iowa, 2 states with some of the highest concentrations of meatpacking workers and the lowest proportions of racial and ethnic minorities, illustrate the disproportionate impact of the coronavirus on minorities, both within the meatpacking industry and nationwide. Well, John Logan, a professor and director of labor and employment studies at San Francisco State University, states Labor Day 2022 comes smack bang in the middle of what is increasingly looking like a pivotal year in the history of American unions. This summer has seen a steady stream of workforce mobilizations. Employees at Trader Joe's locations in Massachusetts and in Minneapolis both voted to unionize. Meanwhile, restaurant chain Chipotle saw the first of its stores unionize following a vote by workers at an outlet in Lansing, Michigan. It comes back on the back of a wave of other efforts to mobilize at Starbucks and Amazon. The growth of unionized stories at Starbucks in particular has been stunning. Since baristas in Buffalo, New York became the first at the chain to unionize in December of 2021, colleagues at a further 234 outlets have followed suit in recent months. Likewise, the success of an independent Amazon labor union formed in 2020 by Chris Smalls, an Amazon worker fired for protesting what he saw as inadequate COVID-19 precautions, informing the first plant of the retail giant to have unionized workforce, has inspired others to do likewise. And this comes as a polling shows that American support for unions is at its highest since 1965, with the backing of 71% of Americans. Something is definitely happening in the labor movement in 2022. And some of the workers are setting up independent unions, others are teaming with established unions. And they've been inspired by pro-union sentiment in political movements such as Bernie Sanders' presidential bids. He had a lot of those union songs with some of his videos, Black Lives Matter, and the Democratic Socialists of America. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, these recent labor wins would probably have seemed unimaginable. Powerful, wealthy corporations like Amazon and Starbucks appeared invincible then, at least in the context of the National Labor Board relations rules, which are heavily stacked against pro-union workers. Under NLRB rules, employers can and do force workers on threat of dismissal to attend anti-union sessions, often led by highly paid external consultants. The significance of the recent victories instills in workers the belief that if pro-union workers can win at Amazon and Starbucks, they can win anywhere. This self-organization is consistent with what was envisioned by the authors of the 1935 Wagner Act, the statute that provides the foundation of today's union representation procedures. The National Labor Relations Board first chair, Warden Madden, understood that self-organization could be fatally undermined if corporations were allowed to engage in these anti-union pressure tactics. Upon this fundamental principle that an employer shall keep hands off the self-organization of employees, the entire structure of the Act rests, he wrote. Any compromise or weakening of that principle strikes at the root of law. Logan writes, over the past half century, anti-union corporations and their consultants and law firms, assisted by Republican-controlled NLRBs and right-wing judges, have undermined that process of worker self-organization by enabling union elections to become employer-dominated. In closing, our UUA president, Susan Frederick Grace, says, our work is far from done. Across the country, we see continued attacks on the right to organize, which violates UU beliefs around the interdependence and the inalienable rights inherent in the democratic process that we hold so dear. For example, Tennessee legislators have put a right-to-work measure on the midterm ballot. And in Massachusetts, technology companies have mounted a huge attack against gig workers, putting millions of dollars into a ballot measure that would undermine workplace protections. There are 31 measures across the country to privatize schools and disempower teachers, including anti-critical race theory bills in several states. And so we must also act to protect workers, to resist unfettered capitalism, to create a more just economic system, and to ensure that the rights of all, including Black, Indigenous, people of color, and the LGBTQIA+ community. Supporting legislation like Protect the Right to Organize Act is one way to get involved. Another is to lead our voices to efforts like the unionization of Starbucks. And our own UU the Vote effort is supporting ballot initiatives to increase the minimum wage in California, Illinois, Massachusetts, Michigan, Nebraska, and Nevada. Nevada. We just launched the UU the Vote effort in 2022, and we hope that everyone can be involved. Today, we are witnessing a growing labor movement built by and for the working class people that's pushing back against a system of exploitative capitalism that concentrates wealth in the hands of a few. It's a movement coming alive from the bravery and brilliance of Black, Indigenous, people of color, women, LGBTQIA+, undocumented immigrants, and poor and disabled communities. Poverty is a policy choice. Together, we can pass legislation that honors workers' dignity, values labor, and holds the quality of life, every life, as sacred. May it be so. Our closing song is a protest song, Solidarity Forever. Please stand as you are willing and able. As we extinguish this chalice, let us carry this flame within our hearts, remembering that people know that they are worthy of respect when they are treated with respect, and people know that they matter when they are treated like they matter. Bread and roses, bread and roses.